Bryan Munson of Husker Online, who joins us on our Allo VIP line, where they understand the importance of exceptional service with local heart. Bryan, Stricky and I were getting excited. We just heard our weatherman say we've got 70 degrees in November up here. We're pretty hyped about that. What's fall weather like for you down there?
It's gorgeous. Was a little chilly earlier in the week, last week, but warmed up over the weekend. I think we're supposed to get some rain on Thursday. I think it's in the 80s today, which is pretty unseasonably warm, honestly. I was outside taking a walk in the joggers and regretted that about a half mile through it.
Well, speaking of heating up, Carlin Jones's recruitment, you wrote about this in your 3 and Out. Let's start, first of all, with just a reminder of who Carlin Jones is in the Nebraska football recruiting class for people who might not remember.
Well, 3-star defensive tackle, Bay City, Texas. I called him, I think, what I call him, the Swiss Army knife of defensive line recruits. He's got this ability, basically short of just playing the nose, he could play 3 technique, he could play 5 technique, which those are kind of the even man fronts. So you're talking 4-3-ish, I think he could play out to a 7 if he wanted to play more of a defensive end. I think he could play a 4 in an odd front, playing defensive end, and that's why Ohio State likes him. Ohio State basically said, like, look, we've got defensive line or defensive end spots open. Now the good news here for Nebraska fans, and I'm not sure this has really been reported anywhere, and I've been away from the board a little bit here, and I need to get back on there, but I don't think he can make the trip to Ohio State this weekend as what he had originally had expected to. So he's, they're in the playoffs. Bay City is in the playoffs. So I think it'd be very difficult. It's always difficult to get out of Texas to get to Lincoln, for a game. Imagine getting out, south of Houston, and you got to drive to, Bush Airport or Hobby Airport in Houston to get to Columbus. That would not be an easy scenario. I think it'd be very difficult to do even for like a 2:30 start. But he can't get out the night before, maybe like what they were thinking was going to happen. Maybe it doesn't seem like maybe necessarily you were counting on getting into the playoffs, but they are in the playoffs now. And I don't think that that's going to be a situation that's going to allow him to get to Ohio State this weekend. So, and I think the thing to remember here, guys, is that, I think that there's multiple spots that Ohio State has open in the class. I think there's 2. And it seems like Ohio State's kind of dialed into 3 defensive linemen. Just Jones is one of those 3. So maybe as numbers or as fate would have it, maybe this thing plays out for itself. But we'll have to see how it goes. But I don't think he can take that trip to Ohio State this weekend like he originally intended to.
Is Ohio State one of those schools that recruits, might make an exception for not having to make a trip just because they know just how good Ohio State is? Or even at some of those upper tier playoff level programs, do the vast majority of recruits feel like they need to get eyes on a campus and a team in a locker room before they're willing to, sign their NLI there?
No, I get that. I think the part to remember here about Carlin Jones is that he's happy with Nebraska. I think he was very excited about getting up to Nebraska and being part of, all the articles that have been written, and talked about with Princeville and Cameron and all the other young defensive linemen, the movement, essentially of Tony White's defense, that having that ability to kind of get on campus and look past, that age aspect and really look at ability, and look at kind of that organic growth and what they're trying to do with development inside the program. I think that really had Carlin Jones, hook, line, and sinker. I think for that, maybe one of the biggest reasons right there, it wouldn't ever come down to a situation that hands down Ohio State is just flat out a better scenario than Nebraska for him. I think he basically has told the Nebraska staff, I've got to take this trip. I'm remaining committed to Nebraska, but I have to go see what the Buckeyes are all about. I think that is a very different statement and a way of handling the process versus like what Kewan Lacey did from Lancaster. And Lacey just decided, I'm decommitting and I'm going to go about doing my business this way. I think that that's just kind of a way to make sure Nebraska knows to kind of go ahead and move on. And Carlin Jones in that way is also, I think, being very true to Nebraska, saying, I really do like it there. I have to go check this out. I have to do it to make sure I'm making the right decision. And Matt Rule has a very good policy on that. Just not trying to, twist guys' arms to get them to come to campus there in Nebraska and come to be Cornhuskers. You shouldn't have to do that for any of your players. They should want to come there of their own, desires. But that's I think though that there's still a need for Carlin Jones to go through basically the evaluation process of Ohio State. Even though I think what you said makes a lot of sense, just where that program is at, the success that they have had. I think that's very tough to compete with at face value. But I think Carlin Jones sees himself at Lincoln, at least saw himself even there before the Ohio State offer, and that's what makes it very difficult now to kind of break into this new I got to go take a look at it thing, because I think he was all in, and ready to be a Cornhusker.
What we're seeing with this staff, especially Bryan, is that they're early on guys. They're not afraid to be early on guys like a Carlin Jones, Kawan Lacey, plenty of others in even their first recruiting class, make offers that other coaches might not be comfortable in. And maybe in, previous day and age where, and you're 3 and out on Husker Online, that when classes were limited to 25, maybe that's not as big a deal, but college recruiting has changed. So what's your prescription for Nebraska to continue being first and early to be able to hold on to these guys when other schools might catch on?
Well, so the good news is that I think Nebraska is onto something when it comes to their evaluations. They seem to have found guys that later on other schools, weren't as quick or to covet or to, regard as highly as what Nebraska did. That's good and bad. Obviously, Nebraska is putting them on the map, so to speak. Nebraska is out there, building a relationship, kind of cementing their name into the recruiting class. Then a school, like Alabama comes in and offers your running back commitment, or Ohio State comes in and offers your defensive line commitment. The way to get around that obviously is through having success. You give the players a lot less to think about when you're going about doing business and you're having, similar type of success, or you're having that trajectory of having that type of success. I think where Nebraska is just kind of at right now, it's just they're not there obviously on that national level to go out there and say that, in the same breath as Ohio State and Alabama, which are both those programs have been completely synonymous with the college football playoff. And I think that's where it really kind of starts. You can look back through the years and just, you'll see those guys over and over again when it comes to the playoffs. So Nebraska needs to be successful. And I think that, if they continue to identify that type of player that seems to, take off and maybe is a better player than what the ratings and the rankings kind of identify earlier on in the process, I think the advantage that Nebraska has by doing that, obviously, is that they show a huge vote of confidence. They have a chance to build a relationship with that guy, much longer. And I think the way that Nebraska goes about doing their business, where it's just not just recruiting the player, they recruit the family, they recruit the high school head coach, they recruit the brothers and the sisters. And they go about doing this in just kind of a more all-inclusive way. You're all coming along. You're all going to experience this tremendous ride. It's going to go through, obviously, through the recruit, but they're bringing them all into the family. I think that part still has this incredible value. I think it's one of the reasons why, obviously, Carlin Jones can still see himself as a Cornhusker despite the Ohio State offer. But I think it's just one of those things to kind of then be the next step to kind of holding on to these recruits and not giving them more to think about. You have to be competitive against Ohio State. You have to go into those situations and be better about, showing competitiveness and being able to make it to Big Ten conference championship games. And obviously I don't think anybody really considered the idea that Nebraska would be one way against bowl eligibility in year one under Matt Rule. I think he's a year or two ahead, but I think that still puts them, a little bit behind the gun here and trying to hold on to some guys that have tremendous senior seasons that aren't, backyard guys. This guy's not growing up down, Interstate 80. He's not living in Omaha. He's not out in western or central Nebraska. He's south of Houston. And I think that's difficult just because you don't have kind of that tie to the player necessarily geographically. And I think Ohio State, obviously, they dip in anywhere they want to go into because they have just had that ability to do that nationwide for a longer time under Urban Meyer going into Ryan Day. So they have that ability to do that kind of thing right now that just Nebraska can't do because they've had success.
We're talking with Bryan Munson of Husker Online. Read his work at it's on3.com, Husker Online, the Nebraska vertical for that. Bryan, at the end of your write-up about Carlin Jones, one of the sentences that stood out to me is you said, this is what Rule is having to repair in the big picture. Win prettier, compete for conference championships, and get to bowl games. It's win prettier that immediately jumped off the stage to me. I think there's one school of thought that would say, just win. Doesn't matter how it looks, especially in a Big Ten West, but the division's going away. It might change that. I don't think the other school of thought is necessarily competing against it where, it has to look at aesthetically pleasing in terms of recruiting. But I think it's fair to say that recruits want to win. They probably don't care how it looks, especially if they're all the way bought into the school. But that by winning prettier, you're probably able to attract a different caliber of recruit. Is that fair to say?
That's a total fair statement. I mean, I think that what you get by wins and wins alone and a commitment to guys that are within the state's boundary, which within the state's borders, neighboring states, I think that you can get those folks that are a little bit more familiar Nebraska historically, and maybe what they're going through currently within their situation. I think that you can get those types of players right now based on how well they're doing, what Matt Rule is saying, how they're going about doing their business, the fact that they are ahead. But when you're clawing and scraping out those wins, it isn't aesthetically pleasing. There's not numbers offensively that jump off the charts at you. The defense clearly does. But I think that we would all agree, that things in that area seem to be way ahead of schedule, but they're keeping Nebraska very, very competitive. But you want to have that balance. You want to have something that you can kind of go back and point to out on film and say, look at these things that we're doing on the football field. And I think that they can do that in certain parts of their game. And I think that there's flashes on both sides of the football, but you're not getting that kind of, you don't have the success to put you into a top 25. So you have to then prove that you're going out there and you're winning these football games. And that's what's really in winning those games, with a little bit of ease and a little bit more style, as opposed to, trying not to lose the game late in the fourth quarter. And that's what I think Nebraska fans they're still kind of coming out of that shell a little bit. They're still kind of coming out of, Nebraska is going to find a way or has to avoid losing this game despite being up 10, 9, 10, 12 points going into the fourth quarter and just never feeling like it's in the bag. And I do agree with what Matt Rule said. I think that, it's moved from Nebraska can't win close games late to they're winning now games not pretty, a little bit ugly, and the criticism that goes along with it. I think as a fan that there's one lens, and I think as a recruit there's another. That recruit that's another, particularly if they've got offers from Ohio State and Texas A&M and Alabama. It's a little bit harder, I think, to kind of put all those things together and say that a win is a win and it's completely and always equal when it's really not.
I think it's interesting as we look at both high school recruiting and even the transfer portal, Bryan, to say this is what Nebraska needs in this class. This is where Nebraska needs to improve on next year's team. It's one thing to have a need or have a deficiency. It's another to fill it. So, you said, winning is important. There has to be mutual interest. It can't just be Nebraska has a need. Nebraska, Matt Rule, his staff snap their fingers, the difference makers on campus. You have to make it a desirable situation for them to walk into.
No, absolutely. I think that's been – I think that you kind of saw that when Nebraska and Matt Rule were bringing in some of those really big-time recruits at the first junior day and then into the spring game. And I think that you could sell that opportunity. I think that you could sell, the fact that most of those guys, if not all those guys, would have had a complete and open path to we're going to get you on the football field, if not start very early on in your career. That, to a lot of people, is maybe all that you ever had to say to kind of get them to be interested. However, going back to, the lack of success, maybe just where Nebraska is kind of at in the landscape of college football at the moment, They're not, in the classification of Oregon. They're not Texas. They're not Ole Miss. They're not Alabama. They haven't. They're still waiting to kind of crack into that top 25, waiting for that opportunity to show a little bit more consistency and basically to kind of prove that what you're dealing with right now in Nebraska is just, it's not just this kind of moment in time where they've had a couple of opportunistic games to kind of go out there and get some wins, but they can string them together, beyond just the month of October. So I think there's a lot of truth to that. I think that the opportunity, Nebraska can absolutely sell that. They should be telling that to all their recruits. The problem is there's got to be a reciprocating, kind of opinion about wanting to go be a starter at the University of Nebraska versus wanting to go be part of a better program at that point in time. They have to kind of understand that that they're trending that way, and Nebraska has to, I think, to give a little bit better view of trending that way before they can get some of those players to come find their way to Lincoln.
Last thing for you, Bryan, also in your weekly 3 and out running back, you mentioned Quan Lacey at the very start of the segment. Don't give your whole list away, but if you had 1 or 2 favorites that you think Nebraska should be targeting at that running back position in this 2024 class, where have your eyes and mind taken you?
Oh boy, you're gonna do it to me, aren't you?
If you don't want to, you can decline. I'm just asking. I have to ask.
I mean, and I think my board is, somewhat changed. There's a guy that's not even on my list anymore that I think I would put on the list and say I'm pretty impressed by him, and I think Nebraska is starting to finally reach out to him a little bit. But his name is JT Bronow. He is a running back out of Florida. I think it's Winter Garden, Florida, in fact. Huge statistics. I think he's averaging like 15 or 17 yards a carry. He's 10'6", 500-meter guy, so kind of fits the box. When you start talking to what Matt Rule's looking for out of that position, he has an ability to kind of do things, in all the different spaces, of course, like Lacey was able to do. Like Lacey was supposed to do kickoff, punt return. He's supposed to do slot receiver, outside receiver, and running back. I think JT could do the same exact thing for Nebraska. I think the month of November is going to be very, very interesting to see some things and how things are going to kind of move, going forward. The interesting but sad part about it is one of the guys who I really like on that list, Teron Petaway, out of Manor, Texas, who played with Prince Will before. Don't think that that's going to be a real viable target for Nebraska anymore. It does appear like maybe there's some academic questions around him a little bit. So maybe one guy that Nebraska fans need to forget about for now, but a very productive tailback. But I like JT, and we'll see where things go going forward.
There he is, Bryan Munson of Husker Online with us, as always, on our Allo VIP line. Bryan, keep those shorts out a little longer. Joggers are nice, but keep the shorts out. You can do it.
I was just moving on into the fall wardrobe, man. I'll gladly slip back into the shorts, but yes, I need to do that for a little while longer as I'm heading back outside to get some of this nice weather.
Take advantage of it, Bryan. As always, we appreciate your time.
Be good, guys. We'll see you.